Coming to you live from KrakCast Towers. We are without John tonight, I'm afraid, for all his legions of fans out there. But I have got the pleasure to welcome Mike and Josh to the studio. How are you, gentlemen?
Doing very nicely, thank you.
Very, very well, yeah.
This week on the KrakCast, we have taxes, we have statue rows. We love a statue row, don't we?
We always love talking about erecting statues.
Yeah. I mean, the word erect is always coming up in a column about a statue, isn't it, Mikey? You couldn't resist. We didn't even start yet. Okay, so first up on the agenda is taxes on alcohol and tobacco. The giveaway program this government has initiated. We all predicted here on this show many times that this would come out of the pockets, first of all, of drinkers and smokers. Mike talked to us about the raises. 10%. Ouch! On alcohol? 10%?
Well, it's not on 10% of the whole price of the bottle, but it's 10% of the tax.
10% raise on the tax.
Yeah, exactly. So when we're talking stronger stuff, your vodkas, your whiskeys, that's for like an average bottle, it's going to be about a zloty 20, I think, increase.
For a bottle of whiskey, say a 50 zloty bottle of whiskey, you're talking about a 150 raise? Is that what you're predicting?
About it, yeah. So like wine.
It sounds so bad when you say it like that.
But, you have to like...
Don't be so unalarmist.
Cigarettes, I think it's like 160 a pack is going to go up, so that's a little bit more.
Oh, that is. Yeah.
That's
well, that is actually a 10% increase.
Because cigarettes in themselves are mainly taxed. Yeah. So, your vice is going to cost more. They're saying, it's not going to hinder sales. All the corporations are saying, well, of course they are. Any price increase hinders sales. And the government is, of course, presenting this as being a health issue.
But of course, while predicting that the tax take will be significantly higher, which of course it will be, So how do you feel about that, Mike? Before you go straight into it, let me phrase it as a question, because I know you're just about to talk about it. I want to act like a real host this week without John.
But feel about what? The tax increase?
No, the way the government's always cynically pitch it as it's for your health. Yeah, we're taking your money.
To make it even better, the article that I read there was interviewing a few of the ministers that were involved in this. They were basically saying like, oh yes, increasing these costs also, help prevent people from smoking and drinking, so it's a little bit of social engineering for, people's health. But they also said, like, just down further in the article, it's like, and we need to increase the amount of money we collect from these things because the costs of treating these people has been increasing. It's like,
this is what gets me. You're blaming smokers and drinkers. What you're saying is they're a burden on the health system. Now, this is a real bugbear of mine, because if you're going to make the economic argument, the only sensible one to make is, well, how much does a smoker cost the health system over the life cycle of his life? And of course, because they die young, that's a factor. They don't cost the state as much overall.
They pay into the system as much as everybody. Exactly. And, yes, their health costs are higher, but then you don't have to pay their pension for 25 years,
exactly.
But, maybe 2 or 3 years. So,
And you can't say that without sounding cynical, but I'm sorry, I didn't bring that part of the argument into it in the first place. This is where governments always pitch these tax hikes. It's for your own good,
Yeah,
and by the way, your bad choices, they cost all of us. Oh, fuck off. How do you feel about it, Josh, as a smoker and a drinker?
Oh, well, yeah. I mean, obviously, I deplore anything that makes it more expensive. And I think, this hypocrisy, about, on the one hand, yes, we're raising these taxes so as to discourage people from doing something that is unhealthy, whereas at the same time, the justification for raising the taxes is because they need more money to pay for all the various kind of free things that they're, promising to give everybody. So it's kind of, There's a broader kind of economic argument that we could possibly go into, but we won't go into in too much detail now because this is just the news, which is, the incidence of tax and how much extra tax can you charge before people kind of start seeking ways to avoid paying that tax, and then you end up lowering the tax take rather than increasing it. And this is, of course, a big flaw in the argument of a lot of, shall we say, kind of collectivist political groups who think that by taxing the rich more swingingly, that the rich will cough up and everyone will be better off.
Yeah, and it kind of ties into our next story about there was a huge seizure of smuggled cigarettes in Krakow recently, and we're already pretty much at that point where there's an incentive for the black market to kick in and get these at a cheaper price. Where geographically Poland is situated, it's ripe for the amount of trucks that go through this country. It's absolutely ripe. If cigarette prices go high, it'll just be that gap will be filled by the black market. In Ireland, we have a situation where there's no doubt generationally smoking has gone down, and even though I wasn't a fan of it at the time, I think the no smoking indoors rule really kind of persuaded a lot of people that smoking isn't clever. But then again, they never factor in the black market sales because that's through the roof in Ireland. And an awful lot of people buy their tobacco while they're on holidays. They stockpile it. They hide it back in their suitcase. You know, they have a friend of a friend down the pub who gets some pouches for half price or whatever because it's so bloody expensive. People don't even consider it a crime. It's like, if you're going to rob me that much, I'll just buy it off Jimmy down the pub like for half the price. What do you think, Mike?
I don't know, and everybody always thinks like it's money that's going to the government anyway. It's going to waste it on something stupid. So why give them the money to begin with?
There is a point. Look, a tobacco tax, I'm not against it per se. It's just when you get to the point where you're incentivizing the black market, you know you've gone too far. You're just dicking around at the edges numbers wise as well, because in Ireland we can't keep putting it up anymore. For the last few years it's been pretty flat because there's only so much you can squeeze out of that particular rock. And putting up taxes on alcohol should be in the constitution. That's unallowed. They should rewrite the constitution of every country in the world to say you can never put up taxes on alcohol. It's inhumane.
I mean, this all comes down to the question of whether or not a government should be insteading any kind of like these social policies on people, directing them into one behavior or another. I mean, the question is there: is it a role of government at all?
Mike. There is no social behavior. They just want more money. You know, they just want to pay. They want to rebalance the budget. You know.
That's definitely the argument the opposition here in Poland is saying. It's like, well, you guys needed extra 1.5 billion zlotys per annum because your budget is going a little overboard, contrary to what other people are like calculating. But yeah, it's all about the money.
And moving along, have you anything to say about the actual bust? It just seemed like a standard cigarette bust.
They got a couple of foreigners here arrested in a Krakow multifamily building. In the garage, they had several 100,000 illegal cigarettes, and then this unpackaged tobacco as well being ready to be sorted. They were saying it's just the cigarettes as well. It's about 200,000 zlotys worth of taxes that would have been paid on that. So, it's a pretty substantial amount. And just considering this is just a handful of guys that probably drove their truck a few times there and back. They say foreigners, which, makes me think they're probably Eastern neighbors of Poland and not Western.
They're not like to be Germans, are they?
No, I doubt. It might be heading to the German market eventually, yeah. But this just, is real. If we already have smuggling as a prominent issue right now, any change in the taxation, no matter how small of an increase, will cause smuggling to become more profitable. That's just simply it.
Yes, Mike, that is simply it. There's not much more you can really say about that particular story, is there? I think we've beaten this
exhausted it completely. Yes.
Yeah. So on to my favourite story of the week about the statue of Jan Sobieski. Have we established yet on the show why the three is in the middle? I know we did, but I can't.
Well, it was sort of
somebody put a comment up.
Yeah, but the comment was just really that he was the third Jan Sobieski, but it doesn't really explain why the three goes in the middle and not at the beginning or at the end.
But for instance. What about British kings? You call it's Henry VIII.
Yeah. And it's Richard III, Dave's favourite. And
anyway, let me set the scene for our listeners. Okay, the siege of Vienna. The Ottomans are overrunning Europe.
Winged hussars.
Yes, basically, Western Christendom is on the brink of collapse, and in rides Sobieski on his charging mount and saves the day pretty much.
It's like, hold my vodka, I'll take care of this.
It's considered one of the great military interventions and victories in the history of European arms.
It had to do with the fact, like, A, the logistics were completely worked out. B, you had forces, Polish forces as well, but Latvian, different Austrian, different countries all over that generally weren't used to working together, and somehow he was able to pull their, resources, pull their tactics, and lead them in a way. And their forces weren't that substantial compared to the Ottomans there. So the fact that they were to repel the Ottomans, push them back and basically end their plans for world domination is impressive. It's one of those events that changed the course of history, because history is an ongoing series of events. But there are certain moments where you can really say, if this hadn't happened this way.
The Battle of Salamis.
Exactly. I mean, it's
right. Well, actually, there was I was reading something only a few days ago about this, an entirely separate discussion on the web, and someone made the point that there's actually twice in Poland's history has it kind of, due to a military engagement in which the country was successful, the whole of Europe has benefited. And
the commies.
Well, the first one is obviously the siege of Vienna, and then the second one was the so-called miracle of the Vistula, when at that time the Russian Revolutionary Army was kind of poised really to just like sweep all the way across Europe, and would have been able to actually
would have been welcomed in many cities.
Well, that's true, but I mean, given that was immediately after the First World War, and just about every country in Western Europe was on its uppers from having kind of spent millions and exhausted millions of lives in fighting the Great War. So yeah. that's a military victory that shouldn't be overlooked in the broader picture.
And all of this is a roundabout way of getting to our story, which is
the
Viennese. I'm not quite clear how it started. It seems that Krakowska and Ludwig, the mayor of Vienna, had some kind of commission cooked up by some Polish artists to create a statue memorialising this. Yeah,
exactly, because there have been about a dozen earlier attempts to get a statue commemorating Jan Sobieski III previously, and apparently one even like a year or two after the battle. But it's for some reason it never went through. And finally, there was a committee set up here in Poland together with in collaboration with some Austrians. So I think about 6 years ago, they said, "Okay, we're getting a statue going." They got international relations involved here. Both cities, but Krakow and Vienna, were had committees and councils set up to discuss what kind of statue. They finalized this design. And then earlier this year, a new mayor came into power in Vienna. He called over Majchrowski and the artists involved with this and said, like, yeah, about that statue, nah, we're going to change our mind on it.
So what is it? Is it because the proposed statue doesn't look enough like Jan 3S or?
Well, let's have a visual review first. What did you think of the statue?
Well, I didn't actually see a picture of it.
Oh, my God, you really never read anything, ever.
Does it have a moustache?
Yes. Basically,
Did you zoom in?
I zoomed. Actually, on the moustache, not that you grant. The statue.
What is it? A 20 is on, isn't it?
It's a pretty large statue. It's about 8 meters long, 3 meters high, massive, weighs like 3.5, 4 tons, bronze, metal statue, cast.
Very angular, kind of.
But it kind of has a mix of a classical statue. So you have Sobieski on a horse. Behind him, and you can see him quite in detail, but behind him in less detail are, the wings of the Husare cavalry behind him that he's leading. And this pretty specific shape of him and those Husare kind of melts away into this angular kind of
the words
crashing
into my head are dramatic, militaristic, perhaps.
It's not supposed to be just him sitting on there on a horse, but actually a moment of action being caught and frozen in time. Yeah. And underneath that you have
Here, have a look at the link I sent you days ago.
And underneath...
I've just had a look at it, and I think it looks absolutely fantastic.
Yes, and the mayor of...
Shame on you, Vienna.
They're basically saying, it's too archaic. That's one argument they're saying. It's well, you guys approved this years ago. And second, they're also saying, we're kind of worried that it might be a little too controversial, and we don't want to offend the feelings of any Turks in Austria or anything like that. It's
Well, I'll just okay. Sorry, Dave, but I mean, from an aesthetic point of view, I mean, how it looks to me is kind of early 20th century, the kind of dawn of modernism in sculpture. I mean, it's kind of largely representative, but it's got a certain kind of, shall we say,
it's got that kind of Shukalski vibe from that documentary.
It does have it. Well, actually, you know what? Now that's very, very interesting because I wonder if some of the objections may be that because it's a little bit akin to some of the. I don't know if you're familiar with the futurists who were an artistic movement in the early 20th century. And they were initially very popular. In fact, Marcel Duchamp was a kind of precursor of the futurists. But then they massively fell out of popularity because they were warmly embraced by the burgeoning Italian fascists. And so, now looking back, retrospectively, something that looks a little too futurist has, unfortunate connotations, which seemingly, socialist realism doesn't get tarred with a similar brush.
And at this point, I think we should get real and lay our cards on the table. There's very much a feeling that the mayor of Vienna felt it would offend the Muslim population of Vienna, given that it's representative of, shall we say, the West's struggle against Islam. Maybe it's a hot topic, Mike. What do you think's behind all this? Let's stop beating around the bush here.
They're just like pussies, I guess. For Christ's sakes, this is an event that happened that really shaped European history. And the statue doesn't have any Islamic or Turkish symbols on or anything like that. It's commemorating an event that happened. Mm-hmm. That was important and is worth remembering and celebrating, even unless you don't like the way things are right now, which unfortunately I think there are a lot of people out there.
Anyway, I don't know what we're moaning about. The long and the short of it is it's staying in Poland, and you can see it in Krakow right now. Tell us what it's on the back of a truck somewhere in Krakow right now.
Right next to the church that's near on... not on Platz Wszystkich Świętych, but the window where the Pope used to stick his head out when he came here on Franciszkańska? It's across the street from that on a flatbed truck.
All right.
So it's supposed to be there for a few more days. and then it's going to Renovations and a few other places. They're hoping to present it in Warsaw as well. It's supposed to do a little tour around the country to remind everybody, like, yeah, this is still a thing. We still have it.
Yeah, that's basically why it's in the news. They're trying to keep the focus on this to try and shame the Viennese into taking the agreed commission and placing it on the Vienna Kallenberg, I believe it's called.
Uh-huh.
I've never been to Vienna.
Oh, I recommend Vienna, actually. Yeah. It's very, very good.
Well, actually, the place where they intend the statue to go up, it's ready. It's like the landscaping is done, the cobblestone, the pedestal, it's all there, ready. It just needs the statue to be, craned in and dropped on it, and it's done.
Mm-hmm. I haven't mentioned the artist's name because Sheswab's second name is intimidating.
That's Professor.
Yeah, well, yeah, he's a very, very talented sculptor anyway. Okay, so more history outside of KrakCast Towers has been dug up on Krakowska. For those of you who are hoping for a swift conclusion to the tramline relaying job that is going on, I wouldn't get your hopes up. Mikey, give us an update.
Yes, they found another historic find around the street here on Krakowska. They found the clay gate. Well, it's not made of clay. It was just called the clay gate.
I thought they found the salt gate.
That was another one.
They found the other gate.
There's some kind of corruption scandal involving clay.
Basically, the Kazimierz was walled off just like other areas of Krakow, and there were several gates to enter into this part of town, into this quarter.
I read about this. The Swedish broke the gates. You wouldn't think the Swedish now be going around breaking gates. Bastards.
Well, you had the salt gate, which they found recently. That was the one that you step out of to get on the road towards Vilitska.
I'm just going to stop you there. Because we've covered these fucking gates about 4 times.
All right, so they found another gate.
I'm just going to say this, right? I'm getting sick of this now. Okay, take a few pictures. I want max 3 hours closed down for the clay gate. And when are we going to find the pebble gate or the fish gate? I'm so sick of this. Just put the trams in already. We get it. It's a layer upon layer of history. Okay, you can't put a shovel anywhere.
The
in the city.
Conservato of the city actually basically said, like, in a jovial, happy way. It's like, yeah, you can't, thrust the shovel into the ground anywhere here without hitting history. And when I saw that, it's like, you know what? Then put the shovel down.
You could end up with a shovel thrust into you, yeah. Which kind of reminds me of something somebody said about John Wayne, which is, even from a long distance in one of these movies, you could always recognise him by his characteristic gait.
Oh my God, that's the worst joke I think I've ever heard in my life, Josh, and I've known you for fucking years, man. Jesus, you've outdone yourself there.
You built up to that one there, though. He thought of it, he planned it in his head, he started, and he committed, yeah.
What's this story about the bank card here? About this old lady stole somebody's bank card and used it 771 times to steal 6,500 zloty, and the person whose card was stolen never even noticed it was stolen.
Yeah, it was over 10 months. Apparently, this woman just found the card lying around somewhere. And now with contactless payments, you just swipe. If it's under 50 zlotys, you don't need to introduce a PIN or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And this woman, when she was using this card, never made any larger transactions, nothing, more than 5 or 10 zlotys. So like very small transactions over a course of 10 months. So we're talking like, 600 zlotys over a month, per month or something like along those lines. The owner of the cards, when this occurred to her, she thought like the card, like the physical card was just, I threw it somewhere in a purse in my house. It's lying around somewhere, because she was using her phone all the time to pay everywhere. So she, she probably didn't notice when you look at a bank statement, like, a stick of gum here, a bottle of water there. You don't notice these things when they're relatively small. But the woman, who stole this card was eventually caught. She admitted to it, facing fines and jail time. But yeah, it's...
Sorry about that noise, listeners. Actually, we should do a piece on how it should be illegal for websites to make noise unless you tell them explicitly they're allowed to. Don't you hate that when you go on a website and an ad starts like just blasting out?
Oh, yeah. As long as it's just music, that's okay. There are other sounds they sometimes make.
It's not okay. Unless I press play, I don't want nothing coming on.
Yeah, a lot of the browsers usually have the option somewhere dug in there to like not autoplay, or like a lot of like Facebook
really dug in.
But yeah, it's like it changes. You forget about, you refresh, and boom, it's going on in there.
I'm honestly not even sure that's possible. Like, to completely turn them off, probably is.
Well, you could always just like stick a little headphone jack in the jack socket of your computer, and then that would like silence.
That's what I have at work, basically set up. Yeah, so the sound never blurs through the speakers.
But I want to kind of talk about this, because I think this woman who who was doing this kind of skimming was very smart, really, because, I mean, it reminds me of something I read years ago about a certain kind of bank scam that kind of bogus companies which would do, and if they got your bank details and then they would never actually send you the stuff. And what they would do is you would set up a kind of a system whereby they would extract random, very, very tiny payments from people's bank accounts of like €1.53, a sort of a weirdy number, and then put a payment thing next to it saying something administration charge or something. And you do that, over sort of 100,000 people, and you can make an enormous amount of money, and nobody feels or even notices that they're being robbed.
And a lot of people don't realize that you're often robbed from credit cards and debit cards, not because somebody ever got a handle on your physical card, but just because your number is out there in the system. This is what goes on in the dark web a lot, where thieves basically hack into systems, get thousands of credit cards history out of these terminals or machines, and they just sell this off to the highest bidder, because in those tens of thousands of cards, there might be a lot of active ones. They just try all of them, as you say, these small sums of money, and they recoup their money like that. A lot of banks don't even tell their customers that the card has been defrauded. They just see these transactions like, oh yeah, we're going to block that, and never, the owner of the card never even knows this happened.
Yeah, I know. Many years ago, I had several £100 removed from my account, apparently in various cash point machines around London. And at the time, I was in Italy on holiday, and I was able to kind of establish to the bank that was the case. So I obviously hadn't withdrawn all that money, and we were big sums actually, like £200 a day in different locations, and they had to give it me back.
When was that?
That was in the 90s. I mean,
I missed the 90s sometimes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what were we talking about?
The woman who stole the card.
Oh, yeah. Cash is king, listeners. Now, moving on to our next story. We reported a few weeks ago that the mural down at our favourite Rondo Mogilska, had been vandalised by some thuggish youths. Tell us, Michael, have they been brought to justice?
You could say.
And if so, when will their hanging occur?
I'll be there. I'll tie the noose. A few days ago, just the Strasmejska that monitor, these these cameras that are all around town, noticed something suspicious going on around Bagatella.
Were these youths wearing hooded sweatshirts?
Yes, indeed they were. And that's how they realized it, because it was the same kind of hooded sweatshirt as the video recordings from the Mogilska incident, a week earlier. So the Strasmejska guys drove over there, saw the guy, detained him until the police showed up. And, he was using red paint. So the obvious pun shows up here because, he was literally caught red-handed because he still had paint smeared on him.
Painting the town red?
Exactly. And just,
God.
he first...
It's finally happened to me, Josh. Sitting beside you this long.
Yeah.
Apparently he kind of denied it. It's like, you've got paint all over you. And then just as the cops show up, the can of spray paint falls out of his pants, and he'd been like holding his pant like up until that moment. So, kind of hard to deny it, admitted it. Apparently he said he had a co-conspirator, a 19-year-old girl. It's just, if you're going down...
I think a public shaming campaign for people like this, bus shelters and stuff, like, a huge life-size photo saying, these two assholes did this, and this is why they're on this bus shelter.
Unfortunately, due to the protection laws they introduced...
give it up. I said this is what they should do, Michael. Don't give me some fucking GDPR bullshit now. This is the KrakCast. We can have as many mad ideas as we want.
I agree with you completely. Besides, jail time, cleaning up or paying for the cleanup, there needs to be a moment of public shame, because you're doing something that disrupts the life for all of the public by ruining like a vision or an artistic vision that was presented, like on the Mogilski or something like that, or just destroying somebody's building or property. You're not supposed to do that.
There's a lot of graffiti on the walls here on Dietla as well. You ever see that? Like, it really really makes some of the buildings look real kind of skanky, like,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that kind of the arcade, the covered arcade at the top of Krakowska where it joins Dietla, and that was like, I thought very nicely renovated and repainted 5-6 years ago. And I mean, on the inside of the arches, there's just all kinds. And again, it's this graffiti that is not even, it's not artistic or anything. It's just kind of like
no Banksies,
here. Scrawls or whatever.
The demented scribblings of troubled youths.
Yeah.
No, I remember like as a kid, they used to always talk about this, but usually kids would use like stencilers or markers or Sharpies, whatever you want to call them.
You were a graffitiist when you were younger, Michael?
No, I wasn't. But I remember as a kid, like this, like
what do you remember as a kid? It sounds like you're guilty of graffiti. Tell us more.
No, I had nothing to do with it. But I remember they got to a point where I think in Australia, like later, they basically came to the point where they wouldn't sell those kind of like markers and stencilers to kids unless it was like an adult present or something like that. Just because kids would take them and then go around the corner of the street and start tagging everything as sight.
There's a shop on Bajega just down from Smoke God which specialises. It sells kind of skateboards and kind of like cool T-shirts and things, but it also has an enormous selection of spray paint and all kinds.
Disgraceful. They should be closed down, raided by the feds.
Well, I don't absolutely totally agree with that because
I'm just randomly.
Oh, I see. Okay.
John's our devil's advocate, so he has to say all the.
No, I think those paints are lovely, and of course you can see some like remarkable examples of graffiti art, and blah 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 blah. Mm-hmm. But sadly, not very often.
We covered this the last time we spoke, but there's a huge difference between tagging over. Like there was a mural there, an artistic mural. That's what he defaced. We've no problem here on the KrakCast with graffiti art, but we do have a huge issue with people defacing things, don't we, Michael? Okay, we've done. What about a couple of these links I threw up here? Because let me tell you something. We've had a few slow news weeks here on the KrakCast, but this one really was taking the biscuit. I mean, the Sobieski thing was the most exciting thing I saw.
Yeah.
And that happened over 300 years ago. So we're not really up to date here, are we? Catching you up.
I'll fire some headlines at you, Mike. Maybe one of these will stick. Half of all road fines are never paid in Poland. Discuss.
Yeah, this is true. Hell, my wife hasn't paid one of her road fines because I don't remember.
Oh my God, you're in trouble, my God.
I don't know if it was speeding or something like that, but it was one of those automated fines, and she tried to actually get in touch with the bureau to payment, but nobody was picking up the phone there because this was another city. She sent some letter that they never wrote, and basically I'm not exactly sure how long, but if they don't demand the payment after a year or two, it's basically canceled. The institution that fined you is the one that has to go after you, the municipality and stuff like that. She wanted to go ahead and pay it. They just didn't make it easy for her for some reason. There was something wrong with the actual ticket that was on there, the fine that she received.
It used to be like that with parking tickets in London. I remember, there was a period when, if you were kind of cunning enough, you could, essentially never pay parking tickets. But then they kind of got wise to that and just started clamping you if they discovered that you had unpaid parking tickets. And then, of course, it got very expensive to sort out. But I'm actually, on the subject of speeding, I saw an amusing picture the other day, which kind of relates to Poland because, well, it's in Poland, and it's from quite a few years ago now. And it was a pilot in the Polish Air Force flying, I think, a MiG-25, almost at ground level along the motorway, and getting caught by a speeding camera. And there's this brilliant picture of the cockpit of this MiG and the pilot looking at the camera with this, I guess shit-eating grin on his face.
Oh, you fly-boys, crack me up.
Doing 680 miles per hour, or whatever that is. Well, 1,000 kilometres an hour, I guess, more or less. Yeah, but
that's going to earn him some points there. Yeah,
yeah, a lot of points. Yeah.
But actually, that's one of the things that kind of freaks me out. They're talking about when it comes to speed cameras. They want to get rid of speed cameras and put up those gates, at the start and end of certain sections of freeways.
Well, like John Wayne.
Yeah, damn. And it would actually, when you drive through one position, they would take a record of what car you are and what time it is, and then when you drove through the second gate, they would just calculate how fast your average speed would have been.
They've got those in the UK, and they are, as you can imagine, hugely unpopular and a marvellous source of revenue for the Highways Agency. Or
for me, that's something worth starting an uprising for. The people should come out, pull those things down. Saddam Hussein statue style, kind of. Yeah.
Well, despite my kind of predilection for driving as fast as possible and in the available conditions, when I was working professionally as a driver in the 80s and 90s, I went for years and years and years without accumulating even a single point, which I was very, very proud of. And then there was one time, and it was I think 2 a.m. It was a Sunday morning, coming back from a wedding somewhere in Cambridge, heading down the M11, and there was a section that was kind of coned off, and there was a 40 mile an hour speed limit posted. There was, of course, there wasn't a car to be seen in either direction for miles around. So I kind of went, sailing through this at about 60 miles an hour, which was in itself was slow, as it was, completely clear and safe, and thought nothing more about it until about only 3 days later, I get a letter in the post saying you were clocked at doing 60 miles an hour in a 40 mile an hour zone. And so I got 3 points and a 200 quid fine, which I was not happy about.
At least you got that wonderful anecdote out of it. Anyway, opposition.
Yeah, you can wake up now, chaps.
Opposition MPs are accusing the Speaker of the Lower House, Elizabetta Vitek, of pro-ruling party bias in the way she proceeded on a vote held on candidates for membership of the National Judicial Council. She annulled a vote after the intervention of MPs. Basically, there was a whisper, call it off before we lose it. Mike, did you hear anything about this?
Yeah, I heard about it, but I still haven't gotten a lot of details out of it because this is fresh. This is like yesterday, isn't it? So the news out there is pretty much all over the place. But yeah, there was like whispering, talking, call it off, not call it off. I don't think it was that big of a deal from what I can gather right now. These votes were going to go through and they were going to win anyway. It wasn't like they were cheating the system to get something through that wouldn't go otherwise. It was just more like they weren't doing the procedures completely perfectly right and they were just being lazy, which is very
standard parliamentary shenanigans. Is that what you're filing it under?
Yeah, it's like, they should get a little bit of a bashing in the news for this and should be like noted that, it was noticed, but it doesn't really mean anything. There's no consequences.
I've got actually something you said there, and this is kind of bothered me for many, many years. The expression shenanigans, was there perchance like an old Irish family called the Shenanigans who were notorious for getting up to kind of mischief and bad behaviour, and as a consequence, rather like there were these race of kind of Germans called the Vandals who were always like smashing bus shelters and stuff like that on their way rampaging across Europe. Were the Shenanigans people who were always like just up to stuff?
Dave, I think you would be the one most equipped here with knowledge on that kind of topic.
Yes. Let me just dig into my deep well of Irish knowledge here, Google.
That's Google.
Where did shenanigans come from? ? Shenanigan seems to have originated in California at about the time of the gold rush, though it was first recorded in print only in 1855. Who knows? Shenanigans, a mid-century, 19th century word of unknown origin.
Because it's a slow news week.
Because hooligan is an Irish name, isn't it? And that the origin of the word hooligan comes from someone called Hooligan who presumably supported Chelsea or something like that.
Let me think. Type. Hold on.
This news is like hot off the press.
Oh wait, listen. This is actually quite good. You're quite clever. Late 19th century, perhaps from hooligan, the surname of a fictional rowdy Irish family in a music hall song of the 1890s, also of a cartoon character.
Aha, there we go.
Might be something.
There you go, listeners.
What other stuff about words do you know?
Oh, lots. If you give me you give me a piece of rope, I'll hang myself with it.
Yeah. Anyway, what else have we got here? News was Polish Enigma code breakers commemorated in London from a crappy little plaque.
Oh yeah, because of course this residual guilt. After years and years and years post Second World War of boasting how we cracked the Enigma code, and then like in the 90s, the Poles coming along and saying, "Look, cough cough, actually guys, we did it first." And then there was that movie where the Americans claimed to it, and then the British.
It's this little plaque in a church though, that the Polish kind of ordered themselves. It's
a small enigmatic plaque.
But
I don't think the Queen was at the ceremony.
The thing is, it was always a misunderstanding. Everybody wants to take
She couldn't
credit for it,
understand the invitation.
Yeah, give us the background to this. So a lot of people might not know that much like the IRF was. Well, let me set it up, Mike. Jesus, you're not allowed to interrupt me now. I'm hosting. Much like the RAF was bolstered by Polish emigres flying missions. Also, the Bletchley Park team was buttressed by several Polish mathematicians. Tell us more, Mike.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't realize that the machine, the Enigma code machine, was around for 10 years before the war, and it was used mainly
called the bomb.
Yeah, that's what the Poles like to call it, and it was basically used for in commercial applications, like banks and businesses would send notes between each other. And the Poles in the early 30s, thanks to the work of 3 brilliant mathematicians, were able to break the code there. So the commercial version of that. Then the Germans military started using it. But the version the military used, it was slightly more advanced than the previous one. So like the same knowledge that the Poles had gained was still applicable, and they were still able to break some of the codes, especially the military. Although the Navy used also Enigma with like an extra added on part to it that they were not able to break. But the Poles were evacuated out of Poland during the beginning of World War II and actually worked with the British team trying to crack the new Enigma codes. And as we know, then we had Turing, the first computer, and everything like that. Because the actual how the code works, they figured it out. The only thing is, there was trillions of possible combinations they had to go through every single day because the master code was changed every day to figure it out. But it's actually kind of fascinating how they realized to figure it out. What they realized at the beginning of a lot of these transmissions that were sent out in the morning, there were standard words like, on Christmas they would say, Merry Christmas. Or if the weather was bad, they would say the weather, or like, oh, Guten Tag. And so they realized that, if you had this like several letters in a row at the beginning of it that probably said, happy birthday. And if they could figure out what letters corresponded with what symbols in that, then they could use that to break the rest of the code. And apparently they used that brute computer power to figure that out each day. So within like an hour of the code going out in the morning, they broke it for the rest of the day.
And of course, this is the really fascinating thing about it is obviously, of course, it helped the Allies win the war, being able to crack the codes, but it also actually was the foundation of modern computing.
Yeah, well, that's why
enormous step forward.
There was a guy, what was his name? Tommy Flowers was the post office engineer, an English guy, and he built Colossus. He took Turing's ideas and he actually physically built the machine that we see in all the movies. He's not in the movie, of course, but actually, Jeremy Clarkson, I'm sure it was him. He made this great documentary about it, actually, about the whole Bletchley Park thing many years ago, and he very much made a point of featuring Tommy Flowers, who's the forgotten man in the story. In many ways, it's not just a poet.
There's those of you who might be visiting Britain, and in particular the kind of South Midlands, there is a fantastic museum at Bletchley Park which is all about the kind of breaking the Enigma codes. No, well, I haven't either, but my father was there and he told me that it was like really jolly good.
Well, we stretched that out to 35 minutes. I think
we did well.
I think we did well enough there. So you try making a podcast when nothing happened in the whole week. It's not easy, all right? So, stick it up your hoop. Goodbye.